So much has happened over the last week, including the killing of American citizen Rene Good by ICE in Minneapolis. But this means that a lot of really important other authoritarian actions have been underreported. So today I'm going to go through some of them, including a new category of war. And then I'm also going to cover the rule of law, propaganda, health, and the environment. So sadly, I've got a new category of war. Obviously, the attack on Venezuela and then the direct threats to other countries like Colombia, Cuba, Mexico, and Greenland have all been in the news all week. But here is what else has been going on, and it really speaks about those threats being really serious threats by Trump and his administration. So firstly, to set the scene, in a New York Times interview last week, Trump declared that his power as commander-in-chief is constrained only by his own morality. And he basically said he's going to ignore international law and any other checks on his ability to use the American military as he sees fit. So how might he use it? Well, as well as continuing to threaten Greenland and also threatening Cuba and Iran with strikes, when it came to South America, Trump said, we are going to start now hitting land with regard to the cartels. The cartels are running Mexico. So that kind of represents a direct threat towards Mexico. And to support his military aims, Trump is proposing a 50% increase in military spending, basically raising the 2027 military budget from $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion, so an increase of $500 billion. And he also needs US defense companies to manufacture more weapons and other equipment. And to this end, Trump has directly criticized defense contractor Raytheon for what he called the company's slow response to the demands of the US military. And he basically threatened to cut its government contracts if the firm didn't restrict stock buybacks. And then a few days after that, he actually signed a new executive order prohibiting stock buybacks and dividend payouts at defense companies that haven't made capital investments or are somehow deemed by the administration to be underperforming. And then kind of finally in this section, and a further sign that by America first, he really means just America alone, the Trump administration announced that it will withdraw from another 66 international organizations. So most of those are UN-related agencies, commissions and advisory panels that focus on climate, labor and other issues that the Trump administration considers to be basically diversity or woke initiatives. And then while all that was happening kind of in the international sphere, the domestic rule of law was also undermined last week. So in a court filing, it became clear that the Department of Justice has released fewer than 1% of the Epstein files, even though the legislation signed by Trump in November mandated full release by the 19th of December last year. And then Trump also discussed again running for a third term, which is unconstitutional. He falsely accused the Democrats of rigging elections, and then he mused openly about suspending future elections. Now, maybe that's all just talk, but it does kind of really speak to an undermining of democratic norms. You know, propaganda and the control of information is a really key part of authoritarian regimes. And there was a lot of quite chilling propaganda last week in the US. So on the 5th anniversary of the January 6th insurrection, the White House launched a new webpage about January 6th, basically praising Trump for his conduct that day and blaming Democrats for having masterfully reversed reality. And this is blatantly misinformation. And then at the same time, the Smithsonian's National Portrait Gallery removed wall text that referred to President Trump's 2 impeachments. So they basically have taken those out of their exhibition. But at the same time, they still have information about the impeachments of former presidents Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton. And for the Smithsonian museums more broadly, and I think it's just important to remember that these are internationally renowned museums, they're facing an ultimatum from the White House to comply with a comprehensive review of the museum's content and plans to check that it matches the agenda of the White House or risk potential cuts to its budget. And then, in praise of the leader's family, the newly named Trump Kennedy Center will premiere the upcoming film about the First Lady titled Melania at the end of January. And then finally here, the ability to report this stuff has also been reduced. So the Corporation for Public Broadcasting was formally dissolved this week by its board of directors, ending its 58 years as the primary funder for PBS, NPR, and local TV and radio stations. The board of the corporation, which was created by Congress to oversee the federal government's public broadcasting, didn't have much choice in this because Trump and the Republicans last year stripped the organization of its $1 billion in federal funding. So basically, Trump's White House at the time claimed that NPR and PBS shouldn't get any federal money because they produce woke propaganda. Moving on to health, Health Secretary RFK Jr. and the federal officials he's appointed have also been busy. So the first thing is that the administration announced really dramatic revisions to the set of vaccines recommended for American children as part of the routine immunization program. And what they did is they reduced the number of diseases covered by the program from 17 to 11. And this announcement is really a massive shift in federal vaccine policy, and it really circumvented the detailed evidence-based process that has underpinned recommendations in the past for decades. So to be clear, there is absolutely no new evidence suggesting that the vaccines that are being reduced are unsafe or ineffective. But RFK Jr. has long sought to reduce the number of vaccines American children receive, and he seems to be getting his way. And I just want to highlight, so one of the vaccines being reduced is RSV vaccine for babies. So RSV is a respiratory virus that's particularly dangerous for young babies. And its reduction comes just as more evidence drops about how good the vaccine is at reducing hospitalizations in babies. So, having these reductions in the vaccine schedule is going to matter, and it is going to lead to more sick children and babies. Also last week, the Department of Health and Human Services released new guidelines on alcohol consumption. So basically, they got rid of long-standing warnings on the risks of cancer from excessive alcohol drinking, and they removed clear drinking guidelines. And instead, all they say now is that people should consume less alcohol for better overall health and limit alcohol beverages, which is likely to be much less effective in providing people the information that they need to safely drink alcohol. And then there's the more quiet undermining of public health in America. So the US Preventative Services Task Force is an independent panel of experts. And what it does is it reviews evidence and it makes recommendations for what screenings, counselling and preventative medications people should receive. And so by law, most insurance plans have to cover those at no cost to the patients. So primary care physicians just rely on those recommendations in their daily practice, whether it's about screening advice or medications to reduce heart disease and so on. But basically, RFK Jr. has been undermining how that task force operates. So it hasn't met in person since March this year. So without citing any reason, RFK Jr. basically just postponed its July meeting and then also cancelled its November meeting because that was scheduled during the government shutdown. But the point is that neither of those meetings has been rescheduled, and there's no idea when that task force is next going to meet. So finally, moving on to the environment, the administration has attacked policies to combat climate change and also regulations designed to protect the environment. So first, the Trump administration has sued 2 California cities last week. And basically what they're trying to do is to block laws, local laws that restrict natural gas infrastructure and appliances in new building construction. And the idea of those laws is you want to encourage cleaner energy in new buildings. And then the administration also finalised the plan to roll back regulations related to the National Environmental Policy Act. And what that does is it requires federal agencies to consider a project's possible environmental impacts before it is approved. But basically, the White House considers that rule is a barrier and a delay to its fossil fuel extraction agenda. So that's a roundup of some of the things that you might have missed over the last week. It has been a really wild start to the year. So see you next week.